Hey everybody, Nick here, and today I got a review for you of this little guy right here. This is the Olamic Cutlery Swish pocket knife. This is a follow-up to Olamic's Wayfarer 247, which, as many of you may recall, won my best knife of the year, best new knife of the year for 2016, I suppose. And so, very, very interested to take a look at this guy, and yeah, glad I got a chance. And speaking of how I got a chance, this guy was sent to me directly from Olamic as a loan. And I want to thank them very much for that. And, you know, with full disclosure, they sent this guy to me as a loan, and I told them, as always, I'm going to talk about the good, the great, the bad, and the ugly, and may call it a gem, may call it junk, and they still sent it, which takes some balls, and I'm going to be returning this guy shortly in the mail. And so, there you go. Next thing, let's do a size comparison, because this is not a small knife. Right here it is against your Spyderco Delica, so you can see, yeah, this is not a small knife. Right here against your Spyderco PM2. Yeah, you know what? This is not a small knife. Even against your rat number 1 here, which is also not a small knife, this is not a small knife. And then finally, against my token, not a small knife, right here, the ZTO452CF, and you can see that these are in a very similar ballpark. This is a big one, 100%. So there's your size comparison, and one other thing to note is that there are a bunch of different varieties of this, but this is actually their quote-unquote base model, with the blasted and the vanilla. It's kind of the lowest of the low end of the Swish. They have a whole bunch of varieties going up to the higher end. So there you go. Let's go ahead and jump into the good, the great, the bad, and the ugly of your Olamic Swish right here. So, on the good side, first off, I like the blade of this guy very much. It is a fine tool for utility cutting, and I mean that in a few ways. The steel on it is Elmax, which is a steel that, especially now that people have figured out how to heat treat it properly, is absolutely good to go. It is a solid steel with a lot of good utility for everyday carry. The blade itself here is ground nicely, in that it is very slicey and is done well on the whole. The fuller does tend to catch things, especially if you're using some kind of a compressible, if you're cutting some kind of a compressible material like foam, but that's the case with pretty much any fuller. But it is overall a very nice slicing tool, and it's got a very nice pokey tip on it. This is a knife that just eats clamshell packaging, for instance, for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, which is great, something I appreciate very much. And so the blade on this guy does cut things. It's reasonably thin behind the edge, and it's a nice utility sort of tool in that way, so I appreciate that. Next thing, the ergonomics on this knife are very, very, very good in a couple of different ways. Although it looks kind of polygonal and whatnot, it looks more designed than anything, it's done in such a way that the shape of it makes this feel very secure in my hand. Even if there is some kind of force grabbing onto this guy, it is going to stay right where it's intended to. And that's great, and that's something I also appreciated in the 24/7. Olamic is very good at making very ergonomic knives, so that's nice. The clip on it is actually a non-issue. One of the advantages of having a low and relatively flat clip is that it is absolutely a non-issue ergonomically. I can't even really feel it in my hand as I'm doing that, so that's a very nice thing. And you can actually choke up on this guy, or at least I can with my smaller hands. If I want to get into, really do a detailed sort of cutting, I can put my finger right here on this rounded piece of flipper tab, and it will, it gives it a slightly different grip that I appreciate. So the ergonomics on this guy are great. Next thing, the lockup is solid, and the lockbar tension is great. That's a little detail, but it's something I appreciate, because so often you'll get lock bars that are just like, oh my god, crazy tense on frame locks, and this guy is nice in that it feels like it unlocks with just the right amount of pressure. So that's good, and it lends itself to a very nice action, which I'll talk about in a bit here. Next thing, I gotta say, I love the design of it. It is a beautiful knife. Both myself and actually the fiance agree on that, and usually we have very different definitions of beauty in terms of knives, but we both very much like this knife. The flowing design here, I mean, it is not odd to picture this knife being called the Swish, because it looks like it's flying through the air, like some kind of flying eel. I don't think that's a thing. But if it were a thing, that's what this would look like. Flying eel? Did I go? Anyways, it's just got very nice lines, nice design, little areas where, for instance, the fuller area ends in this curve right here, little curves everywhere else, and there were lots of nice little details about this guy. The lanyard hole is actually a design detail I like, because so often lanyard holes are just kind of tacked on there. It's just like, hey, we threw a lanyard hole on there. Whereas on this guy, this feels like it's meant to be there. Not only because it is completely, as you can see there, the backspacer encompasses the entire lanyard hole, so the blade can come nowhere near the backspacer. But also, it looks like with the inner and outer holes, it looks like it's really meant to be here, and that's the best thing a lanyard hole can be. It's a nice part of the design. It also has a nice floating backspacer here. What I mean by that is, if we can see, yeah, there's a little bit of a gap on either side of the backspacer, but that's meant to be there. It's got little standoffs here, and so you get kind of a very pretty backspacer, which is also a little bit more lightweight, and frankly is just very attractive with a very nice anodization. And Olamic can do incredible backspacers in their more in the higher end models. They've got great work in backspacers, so that's nice. It's also got some nice engraving on the inside here. Let's see if I can show that off. There you go. Swish S247 is the serial number on this guy. And so I always like seeing serialized knives, and especially when they're done in a nice, hidden sort of way, that's great. The flipper tab on this guy is nicely rounded in a bunch of ways. It's rounded over here, which is great ergonomically. It's also rounded on the backside, so you can see the entire thing has sort of a ball shape to it. And even the jimping on here, which I appreciate very much, by the way, and it does make this very easy to operate, even the jimping goes off the rounding here. So this is, although it definitely has a flipper tab, it's not as pointed, it's not as pokey to some of the other things in your pocket as many. And it's a relatively low-profile flipper tab anyways, particularly given this little thing. It's a nice little detail on that guy. And so I like this knife very much in that it has a bunch of very nice little details. I appreciate that element of the design. Next thing, it's an Olamic piece, and so as you might expect, the fit and finish is just great. There is a bunch of excellence here. And frankly, I can't see any areas on this knife where the fit and finish is something, lacking. I mean, yeah, there may be decisions I disagree. Oh, I forgot to mention this little area. Look at this. This is an area where, as you're flipping this knife, they've given your finger a comfortable place to land with these two extra chamfers. It's another one of those little details. And this little chamfer here, look, every part of this knife has been brilliantly thought through, and that's something I appreciate very much. Then finally, the fit and finish is great, I guess is what I was saying there. And finally, the action on this guy is actually nicer than the 247. 247 had a great action, but it was a very unique action. It relied very strongly, it felt like, on a super strong detent, and then, it flew open 100% reliably, but it was a very, very strong detent. This guy actually dials it back to a level where I would say this detent is actually just about perfect. It's a different feeling than a lot of knives. It's not particularly fall shutty. I mean, you can make it fall shut, but it has a just glassy smoothness in the opening and closing here. This is just really, really nicely done on the whole, and then coupled with that detent, I like the action on the Swish a lot better than I like the action on the 247. It's a little bit more in line with what you see a lot in the modern tactical knife world in terms of detent and closing and whatnot. The 247 was a little bit more of an outlier, and so I think they've moved a little closer to the mean, and I appreciate that. So the action on this guy is really, really great. It's nice in the 247, and I appreciate it very much. So to me, at least, all of that is good, is that it's got this great action with a great detent and a very glassy, smooth sort of pivot. It's kind of neat. You have to feel it. The fit and finish on it is incredible. It's got lots of really great details. You can tell that they were really thinking designing this guy. The design on it is, at least to my eye, beautiful. Has a very solid lockup with great lock bar tension, very good ergonomics, which is something Olamic's usually known for, and a very nice blade for actually cutting things. Let's talk about what's great about the Swish. To me, what's great about this knife is the variety that's available. I think Olamic's specialty, maybe they disagree, but in my mind, Olamic's specialty is taking a production knife platform sort of thing, like the Wayfarer 247 of the Swish here, and then making a billion different interesting versions and aesthetic variations on it. Rather than just gesturing frantically at this and making you trust me, I am going to go ahead and try and edit a couple of pictures in right now so you can ooh and ah as I'm talking here. But you can get all kinds of different varieties in terms of cutouts, different finishes, different inlays on this guy. In fact, this is in many ways the least attractive of the Swishes I've seen and handled. It's their base model with the blasted finish and whatnot, and where Olamic does best is at making these really kind of interesting borderline Rococo sorts of finishing on these things. And so you can get a swish pretty much that's like anyone you like. And interestingly, Olamic has done a program for the 247, and they've led me to believe that they will be doing this for the Swish in the future, where if you end up with a baseline model, you can trade it in basically for a good portion of the retail price, or I think sometimes full retail, and then move to something that's more upgraded, that's more pimped out, etc. And so I think that's a really neat approach, where you buy something on the lower end and, realize if you love the knife, and then if you love the knife, you trade it in and get something that's a little bit more customized to your taste. I think this is a great way to go, and it's a great strategy because you can get something that is custom-ish to you, but isn't, it doesn't have all of the weirdnesses associated with actual true built-to-order custom knives. And so I love, love, love the fact that they offer this much variety, that they'll do things like the trade-in program, and that there are so many ways that you can make this one knife platform look. So to me, at least, that is the great, is that they offer a huge variety in this and any of their other knives. Let's talk about what's bad. So on the bad side, first off, a couple of nitpicks. One is Olamic Tactical. To me, that always strikes me as weird, that they would have tactical in their name, given that they are, in my mind at least, a standard bearer for modern knives that are both artistic and functional. To me, this is tactical. This is artistic. This is beautiful. This is a piece of functional art. It's completely beside the point, but that just doesn't make sense to me. Olamic is one of the least tactical companies I'm aware of, and having that in the name just doesn't do it for me. But that's completely a nitpick. Speaking of other nitpicks, this is a huge knife. For me, at least, that is a little bit frustrating, but for some people, that's a benefit. 3.75 inches of blade and damn near 5 ounces of weight in this guy. Given you can get a much lighter knife by going higher up the range when you get the speed holes, and some of them are just absolutely skeletonized. Those get really light really quickly, but it is huge and it's a little heavy. It's also, let's be real here, a little bit murdery. With the pointy tip here, the fuller, everything. This is not necessarily a super lunchroom-friendly knife. Speaking of that fuller, that's the next thing that I'm going to go ahead and call bad. I don't love fullers. That's a simple fact of life because in my experience, they tend to trap crud and they tend to interfere with cutting into areas that are, well, especially if you're cutting into like a thicker foam that has some expansion to it. It's very easy for the backside of the fuller to get caught on things. That said, this is a better fuller than a lot because it is very concave. It is sort of just a single ball-shaped groove in there. And so it's very easy to get in there and just wipe that fuller out entirely, and you can do so in a way that leaves it pretty clean, as opposed to fullers that have right-angle corners in there where you're never getting the gunk out of there. So it's not a bad fuller, but I'm not sure there is a good fuller, at least to my opinion. Speaking of my opinion, I'm not happy with T6 screws on this guy. This is a huge knife, and to have these tiny little strippable T6 screws just drives me a little bit nutty, I'll be honest. I mean, they could afford to use much, much bigger, much, much nicer, deeper screws, and they haven't here. Yeah, it's a detail, but it's a detail that starts to bug me at this kind of a price point. Speaking of which, this has a very high price point. We're looking at $465 here. That is a lot of money, and that is the base price. You will never find a Swish cheaper than this guy right here. I don't really think it's out of line, given the quality, given the level, the standards, the action here. This is doing for $465 something that a lot of knives do for even more money on top of that. And particularly in the higher end models that have nicer finishing and things like that, easily they can earn their price points. But the fact remains that $465 is a lot of freaking money for a pocket knife. And so that's going to put this guy out of range for a lot of people. And that's why I'm really excited about some of the other models coming in the future, specifically the Buska, which is at a much lower price point, because it's a smaller knife too, because I think it'll make this kind of quality available to a bigger slice of people. Then finally, on the bad side, this area down here, the sharpening choil area, is a little bit uninspiring. Meaning, I mean, take a look at this. They've got what could be a sharpening choil down here, but it's not quite deep enough to fully coat to fully cover the plunge grind here, and as a result, you get this little smile up there. I would have loved to see this go just a little bit deeper and turn into a real honest-to-God sharpening choil rather than a gesture at a choil that they have here, complete with a little bit of trouble sharpening there. So that's a little detail, but it is a little detail that really does bug me, and it's the only real fit and finish issue on this entire knife. And, you know, not a huge deal. I mean, you can see I'm nitpicking a little bit here. So that, to me at least, is the bad, that they could have done better on the sharpening choil here, or really turned this into a sharpening choil rather than just sort of a concavity. $465 is a lot of money, and in many ways, this base model doesn't feel as worth it as some of the upgraded ones, where you pay more money, but you get much nicer finishing, things like that. The T6 screws on a knife this big don't impress me so much. The fuller, I never love. The big murderiness, I never love. And I could still do without Olamic Tactical, because this is so much better than modern tactical sorts of things, at least to my personal taste. Let's talk about what's ugly, because sadly there is some ugly here. So on the ugly side, there are two ugly issues. The first one, any longtime viewer of the channel will be able to recognize immediately, and that is this little guy right here. This is a spanner-style pivot. Rather than using one of the many different great mechanisms out there, whether it's Torx or Allen key or hex, well, Allen key is hex, or even just a freaking groove that I can slide a coin into, instead they're using this silly spanner-style screw. And although they give you a tool, which is nice, but I've always said, you know, giving somebody a tool for a proprietary screw is like giving them an ice pack after you kick him in the nuts. Like, that's kind of you, but come on, we could have skipped this. And unfortunately, in this case, it's especially bad because they're using this pivot for, as a canvas for beautiful anodization. And they're giving you a tool that has rounded little edges, so it's very easy for this tool to skip out of there and scrape up the anodization. I really, really dislike these pivots here, and I am thrilled. That said, I am thrilled to be able to say that, according to Olamic, they're not going to be using those pivots in future models. So this is them, clearing out the last of the stock of them. It's still ugly, but at least it's not an ugly that we can expect in the future. Then finally, on the ugly side, the clip on this guy is unfortunately just not very good. It's very nice ergonomically, and it is very attractive. It matches the lines of the knife, but unfortunately, it's kind of a textbook art over substance sculpted clip. Because if we take a look here, we can see that there is very, very, very little space underneath the clip for your actual pocket to go into. If we compare it to this guy, this is the spring clip on a Spyderco PM2, you can see this has a bunch of room for your pocket, and this really doesn't. That's not great, and it means that practically speaking, this guy, even on the pants I'm wearing right now, will only get about this deep into the pocket before the material binds up in there. There's too much material for this very tiny little clip there. The other thing that's really nasty about it is take a look at the edge of it. Rather than having a ramp or something along those lines, this just ends in sort of a little spear point that will just, if your pocket is not sufficiently thin, will just kind of try and stab its way in there. One well-worn pair of pants, tongue twister, that I had that's given as many years of wear from, carrying a knife. This guy actually just chose to stab right into the pocket material rather than going onto the pocket. That was just not a great surprise. And so this clip is something that works. I mean, you can get it into your pants, but it requires extra attention every time you do it. And it is one source of pain in an otherwise super compelling knife. And it gives an otherwise heroic effort a very serious Achilles heel. So I hope that someday they're going to offer a new clip as sort of an upgrade here. Even if they would just put something as boring as like a Shabazz style clip on there, it would make a huge difference, and it would make this a much more compelling everyday carry piece, as opposed to right now where this clip is better suited to art than to the pocket. So to me at least, that's the uglies. It's got a really unfortunately bad clip, and it's got a silly spanner pivot, but at the very least they know better and they're not doing it in the future. Let's talk about the final conclusions here. Final conclusion, this is absolutely 100% a great knife. It is a beautiful design. It's exceptionally well made. It has that level of attention to little details that I've come to expect out of Olamic, and they've improved on the already pretty damn good action in the Wayfarer, making this guy, I think, just a really, really compelling knife, even at that pure action level. And the thing is, on top of all that, you can get one that looks pretty much however you want to pretty much any taste. That's really great. This is a knife that you can get very custom-ish, even though it's a production knife with all of the benefits that accords you. Mind you, it's not without downsides. It is huge. It is murdery. It does have a silly pivot, and it has a clip that works best on those pumpkin spice yoga pants kinds of days. For me, those things are enough to keep it out of the pocket. I mean, let's be real. This is not a Nick Shabazz knife. It's huge, it's murdery, it's 3.75 inches. But, you know, if you put the clip aside, all of that is largely personal taste. Because if none of these things bother you, I think this is absolutely wonderful and will absolutely be a gem for you. It is a worthy follow-up to the 247. It's an excellent piece of technical knife making. It is a pretty damn good cutting tool, just even putting that aside. But more importantly to me, it's continuing proof that Olamic is among the best American companies making knives right now. And it's proof that, my God, I need to get one of the Buskas. That's their next model. That is really a Nick knife. It's a smaller knife. It's great, great, great. But if they're doing this one well, that makes me convinced they're going to do the next one well too, and that's bringing me some joy. So look, the Swish is absolutely a great knife, and I think that if you're who this is after, if this is to your style, this is absolutely going to be a Swish, nothing but net sort of slam dunk for you. Anyways, I hope this was interesting, that I leave you swishing for more, and that you have yourselves an absolutely wonderful rest of your day. Bye now.